up, Arturo and my father were really close friends. And then when I went to art school and then I moved back to Taos, Arturo had on their property they had here, they had a studio and a guest house with a studio attached to it. And I lived there for probably 3 or 4 years till I was able to get on my feet on the ground and get my own home. And so I used to go and hang out and visit with him every day. So there was always a good connection. And then I got to know his brother Paul really well, who lived just down the street. And it was kind of a fascinating, they were so interesting. And it was always funny because Arturo was a brilliant storyteller. And I remember Paul, his brother, saying, he tells all these stories, and he said probably 75% of them aren't true. And he said, but the ones that you think are like, there's no way that could be possible, he said those were the ones that were actually true. He was such a great storyteller. And Paul was he was more quiet, but he was such a loyal person. I mean, if he said he was gonna do something, he would always do it, follow through, never forget. He was very thoughtful. Arturo, he was such a character. He looked like he called his farm La Mancha Farms, but he looked like Don Quixote. The other person that was like their best friend was Psyche Caravas, that owned the La Fonda Hotel on the Plaza. And he actually owned the D.H. Lawrence paintings. So the whole group, they were banned in England. And I forget the whole story of how they wound up, but he ended up with the whole collection, and he had them in his office, and you could pay $1 to come in and see the paintings. And Psyche was such a character. He looked like he just stepped out of one of the Godfather movies. But he was such a kind, warm, wonderful human being. I don't think I've ever met anyone in Taos, with a couple of exceptions, that were as kind as he was. For years even, and at the Sagebrush Inn, he used to have, he'd always have a Christmas dinner for underprivileged people, where they could come and eat, but he was always under the conditions no one could ever know that he paid for it, and he paid for all of it. He'd do that every year for Christmas for years. That was kind of the person he was. And there was a few people in town. When Leon Gaspard was still living, he was one of the early Taos painters that came from Russia. His wife was really, really ill. So Psyche would go and pick her up in a car and just take her out for rides so that he could paint and work in a studio. Then he'd bring her home. When my mother toward the end of her life was really sick, he used to come into our gallery every single day, and he'd come in every day and he'd spend at least an hour and take her into a side room and just visit with her and talk to her, tell her, no, you're not working right now. You're gonna entertain me. And he'd just have conversations with her. And that was like kind of the person he was. And so he and Psyche and Paul and Arturo's wife, Jackie, they'd always have these wonderful dinners and all these friends come over and these get-togethers. And Psyche would just give them the hardest time ever. And they were constant, just really witty banter going back and forth. It was kind of a highlight of like really fun old Taos characters that had experienced everything all over the world, and like just getting together and doing crazy stuff. It was fun. I started the youth ones. I was actually thinking about that the other day, in 2010. So this past summer was the 15th year of doing the summer ones. And I don't remember when I started the adult ones. I was trying to remember that. I want to say, because I didn't start with the adult ones right away. There was, after doing it, I'd stopped doing life drawing classes with adults, and I kind of just wanted to focus on younger students. And then I kind of thought, well, some of the students had graduated and they kind of missed classes, and I thought, well, maybe I'm at a point now that if I do that for adults, that would be nice, and they could come if they wanted. So then I spoke. It was one of the previous directors. I can't remember which one now, and I said, well, I'd be happy to do one in September as part of the Fall Arts Festival for adults over those 4 Sundays, and I've just been doing it ever since. I remember just as a little kid, we had like encyclopedias and these childcraft books, and then we had a whole bunch of art books, and I remember books of Michelangelo and Leonardo, and that was kind of like, that was, I don't know why, for me that's always been, I never got beyond those two. I mean, in recent years I've loved doing animals because of the expression. Animals, I think the comparative aspect of with human and artistic anatomy between the two is super interesting. But my first love is still just the human figure. Ultimately, you can just, there's so much emotion in it, and you can do so many things. And I like work that's timeless, that doesn't fit into, I don't like art, for me personally, that's kind of a novelty or represents an era. So when you look at certain artists throughout history, you look at it and you're like, oh, that looks like 17th century Baroque. That looks like the 1920s. It's really dated. And it may represent a period really well, but to me, Michelangelo, Leonardo da Vinci, Auguste Rodin, all those people, to me, their work is timeless. It could have been created in any art period. It just sort of represents the human condition. I, well, I, I went to, when I graduated high school, I went to a place that doesn't exist anymore, St. Mary of the Plains. It was in Kansas. And in the end, I didn't want to go back. It wasn't, I didn't enjoy that. So then and I was like, didn't even want to go to college again. I hated the experience. I didn't like college life. And then my parents said, well, you can't just do nothing. So they took me down and enrolled me at the University of New Mexico. And they said, and then I talked with somebody and said, well, just take classes that are interesting to you. So I took a bunch of art classes, and I took some jewelry classes. And then I'd always grown up around art, so I always liked art. And then I got in there, and the instructors were kind of more interested in conceptual art and things of that nature. And remember, we had to do a drawing project, and I felt I didn't know anything at all about art, but I already knew more than the teacher did. It was terrible. Didn't even know what he was doing. So then at the end of the school year, we worked it out with a family friend that lived in upstate New York. He was a muralist, and he did murals in cathedrals. So I went and stayed with their family for the whole summer into the fall, and I worked with him on murals that we were putting together for an Eastern Orthodox cathedral. And we worked together, and he showed me how he would do all those things, and I'd help him in the process. Kind of like the old concept of atelier style teaching, where you train with a professional. They have drawings, you copy the drawings, then you put the drawings on the images, and then you paint them, and he would do the finishing touches. And And I absolutely love that. And so then I ended up, shortly after that, I transferred to the Art Students League and to New York City, because there was a teacher there who I always loved his work. He used to show, we had our own gallery, and he showed in our gallery, and he did like, to me, he was like the closest thing to a living Michelangelo. And his demonstrations and his classes were just, I mean, you couldn't believe that somebody could draw like that in this day and age. And I took classes with him, 3 at the Art Students League. We had life drawing classes from 9 to 12, 1 to 4, and 5 to 8. And I did that solid drawing from life models for close to a year and a half. And I feel like you just learn so much more from a traditional art school than you'd ever learn from a college. I mean, when you look at the hours and all the work the body of work that you do, I figured it out at one point. If you had gone through the college system and a master's program and a PhD, a doctorate program in art, you wouldn't have put in as many hours as if you were to take that many life drawings sessions or painting sessions for 2 years at an art school. The amount of work that you actually had to do and the exposure you got. And it was nice because in the classes at the Art Students League, everybody that was there was only interested in art. There was no degree. There was no grades, nothing. You were there purely for the love of what you were doing. And so you didn't have any weird situations in the classroom. Everybody was so focused and so serious. It was a wonderful experience. One thing I learned in that scenario is you have to do a lot of work. You have to constantly be working to grow and progress. There's some people that'll sit there and work on something for a whole year and they'll do 2 pieces. And I remember my instructor at the Art Students League, he said basically, try to do 1,000 pieces a year, then you can narrow down to 250, and then from your 250, narrow it down to 100 that you really feel successful with. Then take that 100, narrow it down to 10, and at that 10, if you've done one great drawing, you've accomplished something in your lifetime. The other great advice I got was when you get to a certain point and you've hit a stumbling block, don't tear it up, don't rip it up, don't throw it away. Put it away for 6 months. Like, don't look at it, and then just start a new one. You just have to get to a point, you do something, start a new one, do something, start a new one. And then 6 months later, you can take out some of those and look at it, and you're like, and you were messing around with it in this lower location. It turns out that all you had was something that was off in the upper left, and you immediately look at it differently, you recognize it and say, oh, this was what was wrong, and you fix it, and all of a sudden it's one of your favorite things. I reached a point kind of as I got into my late 40s where I remember I started thinking about all the people that gave to me when I was younger. So I kind of wanted to do that in turn. And so that was what kind of led me back into teaching and working with youth. I'd done artistic anatomy life drawing workshops with adults, but it wasn't the same. I wanted to do, and that's how I wound up working with kids, especially high school age, because they're on the other end where they're trying. If you can kind of inspire somebody to go on and pursue a career in it, it's kind of really meaningful. They can ask great questions. They have great imaginations, and they're full of enthusiasm and life and excitement, and it's really, that's probably, for me, that's been one of the most fun things that I've done. Sometimes we have students and, some of them come from difficult situations, and then they will come in every day for a few hours and Like they can put it all away and they can just express themselves. If they have anger or they're upset about certain things, they can express it, and they're given all that freedom. And if they have a day where they're struggling and that they've done something awful, I'll sit there and I'll say, well, this kind of reminds me of something or other, and we'll turn it into this just wild, crazy drawing. And then they're laughing, and it was like, that's great. Just if things aren't going your way, just take it and go off in another direction with it. And I think they appreciate being able to understand that it's okay. It doesn't have to look exactly what you're trying to depict. You can take it and make it something cooler. And that's really fun. And I love seeing a student light up that way when you've kind of reached that spark in them. It's kind of fun. Those exhibitions were usually done with my fantasy art and creature design class. It's a little bit more of an advanced drawing class. Usually I've had the students, they have to take a full year of artistic anatomy, human and animal anatomy, before they can be in that class. And they have to be fairly adept. And we'll do kind of a classic book, and they'll work from illustrations, but they are to depict them in their own interpretation. So like one year we did Dante's Divine Comedy. We did the Inferno, and then they looked at images, illustrations by Gustave Doré that were all in black and white, and they would look at them and do their own interpretation. They could add color, but they had to keep within the spirit of the theme. And one year we did Don Quixote, we did Alice in Wonderland. This fall, we're doing the Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Because kids, I realized over all the years, I've never done anything that has a lot of water. And from a technical standpoint, learning how to depict water and ships and texture, different type of texture than they're used to, could be a really interesting theme. And so far, some of them are doing amazing things. All my classes, for the most part, are all drawing classes. I strongly feel that drawing is the foundation for all the visual arts. So the better you are at drawing, no matter which direction you go from there, you'll be successful. You'll have that solid foundation. Because I've had kids go into concept design, doing stuff for gaming, for film, animation, kids that want to become studio painters, may go interested in sculpture, architecture, but my hopes is they leave here with an understanding of the foundation of drawing, because that's ultimately sets the basis for everything else you'll do. I'm actually going to do something in my creature design class this spring that will be something I have not done before, but I've been thinking about it for a while. So now with all the new AI platforms, I think it's important in our future that kids have an understanding how to use that. A lot of colleges and a lot of biomedical research programs and whatnot are going almost completely into AI activities, and because you're capable of doing things that we can't write code for in our lifetime as fast as a computer can. And so it can really help, especially with medical research. It's making huge strides. But if we take away all technology from our school, we're actually doing our students a bit of a disservice. So I was gonna plan to do this thing in the spring, where I'll give the kids themes. They have to use an AI program to help create creature programs, but then they'll draw them. But the whole thing, they have to type in the information. all the specifics, all the details, and to get to the image that they're kind of how they envision it, and then they will draw it. And I thought that something that I want to do that kind of pushes it into a little bit of a modern outlook and where our humanity is at today, but still keeping in mind the traditional core studies that you need to complete it, to put your kind of your interpretation on it, and not an artificial intelligence interpretation. So that's something that I'm planning to start in the spring. That's a bell.